Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. John Miller had always considered his life to be relatively quiet, routine, predictable, and grounded in the humdrum of his work in a tech support office. Living alone in his small apartment in the city, he had grown accustomed to the predictable creaks and groans of the old building he rented. The walls weren't exactly soundproof, and the pipes rattled at night, but nothing unusual had ever happened, until tonight. It was just past midnight when the ceiling gave way. The light from his desk lamp flickered momentarily, and the air grew oddly still. John had just finished his last call of the night, his head still buzzing with frustration over a difficult customer. He sat back, rubbing his eyes. Suddenly, the room trembled, followed by a loud crash. The sound was so sharp and sudden, it felt as though the entire building had been hit by a truck. A shower of plaster and dust rained down from above. John leaped out of his chair, his heart racing, unsure if the room had been struck by an earthquake or if something had fallen through the floor from the apartment above. Before he could take cover, a strange, almost magnetic force pulled him toward the epicenter of the destruction, directly under the collapsed ceiling. Through the cloud of dust, John saw what appeared to be a shape emerging from the wreckage, something humanoid, but undeniably different. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light. But no, the shape solidified, and what emerged was a woman. She was tall, her presence overpowering in its elegance. Her skin shimmered in hues that John couldn't even describe, like the glow of distant stars. It wasn't the usual pale or tanned hue, it was otherworldly. Her hair flowed in waves, almost liquid in texture, changing colors with each subtle movement, shifting from deep purples to silvery blues. And her eyes. Her eyes glowed faintly, like twin orbs of pale fire. John stumbled backward, his mind trying to grasp what was happening. This wasn't possible. He wasn't hallucinating. The woman, no, the alien, seemed unbothered by the rubble surrounding her. She stood tall, scanning the room, her gaze lingering on John. Her lips parted, revealing perfect teeth that were far too sharp to belong to any human. And then, she spoke, her voice like a melody yet with an underlying power that sent a shiver through John's spine. Human. Her voice was calm, but there was a subtle edge to it, as though her patience was thin, though not hostile. You are not what I expected. John could barely form words. His breath was shallow, and his body froze as though his mind couldn't fully process what was happening. An alien, an actual alien, was standing in the center of his living room. Who are you? He stammered, barely able to keep his voice steady. The woman looked down at him, her glowing eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she studied him. I am Lyrics, from the constellation Xylox. I've come for a very specific reason. John blinked, trying to wrap his head around the sheer absurdity of it all. Xylox? Was this some elaborate prank? But there was no way. The dust, the ceiling, this was real. The thought of running crossed his mind, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. Lyrics stepped forward, her movement fluid and graceful, as though gravity didn't fully affect her. She examined the debris around her, then turned her attention back to John. Your world is in danger. And you are crucial to its survival. John's brain stalled for a moment. Danger? Survival? This couldn't be real. He shook his head, unable to make sense of her words. Was this some kind of elaborate trick? I don't understand, he managed to say, still frozen in place. Lyrics didn't seem to expect him to. No, I suppose not. It is not your fault. You have not been trained for this. She glanced at him almost with pity. But you are of the right species. It is time to begin. Before John could respond, a blinding flash of light filled the room. He instinctively shielded his eyes, but when he opened them, everything had changed. The walls of his apartment were gone, replaced by an infinite expanse of stars stretching out before him. He was no longer in his room. No, he was standing in the middle of what appeared to be a vast, open spacecraft, with towering, metallic walls surrounding them. John's mind raced, panic threatening to take hold of him. He turned toward Lyrics, but she remained unmoved, as calm as ever. Where am I? What is this? How is this happening? Lyrics finally allowed her gaze to soften. This is my ship. We are now in the midst of a war, one that has already reached your world. And you, John Miller, are the one who can tip the balance. John's mind reeled. War. What do you mean, tip the balance? I don't. I will explain, Lyrics interrupted, her voice firm but gentle. But first, you must understand that your kind, despite all your flaws, possesses something unique, an ability to survive, adapt, and fight that no other species in the galaxy has. She paused, studying him closely. This is why you are important. But we have no time to waste. John's head was spinning. He tried to focus, tried to understand what was happening, but the more he thought about it, the more it seemed impossible. A war. An alien woman. His life had just been turned upside down. He had no idea how he could possibly play a role in something so monumental. Lyrics' expression hardened, her gaze sharpening with urgency. Prepare yourself, John Miller. You will soon see that what you believe to be a simple life on Earth is nothing more than an illusion. And in the coming days, you will discover the truth of who you really are. John opened his mouth to protest, but before he could say another word, the ship's walls shimmered, and a new, horrifying reality began to reveal itself. His journey into the unknown had only just begun. The alien woman had come to Earth for a reason, and John was about to learn exactly what that reason was. John's head was spinning as the walls of the spacecraft seemed to pulse around him. The air felt thick, yet it had an oddly clean quality to it. It smelled faintly of something metallic, something ancient. The stars outside the ship were no longer distant specks in the sky, they were a tangible, endless sea that filled the void of space. John's breath quickened as he tried to reconcile what he was seeing. The last thing he remembered was sitting in his chair in his apartment, staring at the flickering light above him. Now, he was here, in the middle of an alien ship, in some far-off part of the universe. His mind refused to process it. It felt like a dream. Or worse, a nightmare. Lyrics, the alien woman, stood calmly by his side, her eyes never leaving him. She seemed to be waiting for him to absorb the situation, her posture regal but relaxed, as though she had all the time in the world. Please, you have to explain. John's voice trembled. He felt like a child, lost in an unfamiliar world. Why am I here? What's this war you're talking about? What does Earth have to do with any of this? Lyrics tilted her head slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing with something that resembled curiosity. I understand this is difficult, John Miller. You were not meant to learn of this so suddenly. But time is short, and you need to know. John stood frozen, feeling like an insect pinned to a board, trapped in a vast, unyielding web. I'm just a regular guy. What could I possibly have to do with any of this? The war I speak of is not one that is visible to your kind, Lyrics began, her voice low and steady, carrying a weight that felt as though it should have been impossible to ignore. It is a war fought in the shadows, a battle between an ancient race of beings known as the Jalak and the civilizations they have enslaved across the galaxy. The Jalak have an insatiable hunger for power, and they will stop at nothing to expand their dominion, crushing entire worlds beneath their boots. John's stomach twisted. The Jalak sounded like a nightmare straight out of a sci-fi movie, but the intensity in Lyrics' voice made it clear that they were far more than just a fantasy. But why me? John asked again, shaking his head in disbelief. I don't have any special powers. I'm just an office worker. I don't know anything about alien wars, let alone how to stop them. Lyrics' gaze softened, and for the first time, John saw something like compassion flicker in her eyes. You do not yet understand your importance. The Jalak are powerful, yes. But they are bound by their own limitations, weaknesses that they have carried with them since the dawn of their empire. They are unable to adapt, to change, as easily as your species can. You humans, you are capable of evolving, of finding new ways to fight, new methods of survival. In a war such as this, where brute strength alone will not suffice, adaptability is your greatest weapon. John blinked, the weight of her words settling on him like a stone in his chest. You're saying, we can defeat them? Lyrics nodded slowly. Yes. You. Your species. But only if you are prepared to fight back. She paused, looking down at her hands as though reflecting on something that was beyond John's comprehension. I was sent here to find you, John Miller, because you have been chosen. You are a key player in the coming war. You carry something within you that no other human possesses, a potential that, if harnessed, can help us win this battle. John's mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. He was no hero, no chosen one. He was just a guy who had gotten used to quiet, ordinary life. Yet, standing here on an alien ship, hearing Lyrics' words, something stirred within him. The uncertainty that plagued him began to turn into something else, fear, yes, but also a sense of urgency. A need to understand what was happening. How can I help? What do I have to do? John asked, his voice more certain now. His hands clenched at his sides. Lyric seemed to study him carefully, her eyes glimmering with a hidden understanding. The Jalak have already infiltrated your world, John. They are more powerful than you could ever imagine. They have sent agents, disguised as humans, to manipulate and control key elements of your society, governments, corporations, military forces. Their influence has already begun to spread. John's stomach churned. The idea that something as terrifying as alien infiltrators could be operating on Earth was enough to send chills down his spine. So, you're saying there are people on Earth who aren't human? Lyrics nodded again. Yes. Some of them may be people you know. But most of them are agents, sent to prepare your planet for invasion. The Jalak strategy is subtle but effective. They've been working for decades to weaken your defenses, to prepare Earth for their arrival. But they underestimated humanity's will to survive. They underestimated you, John Miller. John's pulse quickened. He felt his body tense as adrenaline surged through him. What do we do now? Lyrics' lips curled into a faint smile. First, we must prepare. I have brought you here to train, to unlock the potential within you. You will need to learn how to harness your own unique abilities, the ones you don't yet know you possess. It is not enough to simply fight. You must become something more, something that no one expects. John's heart raced, his mind spinning with questions, but one thing stood out above all the rest, the fate of Earth rested on his shoulders. How do we start? He asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts in his head. Lyric stepped forward, raising her hand. A holographic display appeared in front of them, shimmering with information. The symbols and languages that flashed across it were incomprehensible to John, but Lyrics was already speaking, her tone filled with certainty. There is a device that the Jalak have hidden on your planet, a powerful artifact that will tip the scales in their favor. If we can find it first, we can cripple their plans before they ever get a chance to strike. John leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the strange symbols. What kind of device? Lyrics' gaze grew hard. It is a weapon, one that can alter the very fabric of reality itself. If they use it, they will have the power to rewrite the laws of physics, to reshape entire galaxies at will. We cannot let that happen. You must find it before they do. John nodded, feeling a surge of purpose. Where do we start? Lyrics gave a slight smile, her eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and determination. We start by returning to your world. The search for the device begins now. And with that, the true journey began. The harsh, sterile light of the ship illuminated the strange room around them. John could feel the hum of energy in the air, like the entire ship was alive. Everything seemed so advanced, far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Yet, it all felt so real, so tangible, even though the reality of his situation was anything but. Lyrics moved effortlessly across the room, her fluid grace belying her otherworldly presence. The ship felt like a living entity, every surface glowing softly as though it could respond to her touch. It made John feel small, insignificant, but also filled him with a strange sense of wonder. The hum of the energy was almost calming, a reminder that this was no dream. He wasn't imagining any of this. He turned his attention back to Lyrics, who was studying a series of floating holographic displays. She looked up at him, her glowing eyes reflecting the soft lights of the ship. "We are preparing to return to Earth. But first, you need to be ready. The Jalak are already there, waiting for us. We must be vigilant." John swallowed hard. "How can I be ready? I don't even know what I'm supposed to do." Lyrics' lips curled into a faint smile. "That's why we're here. I will guide you through the process of unlocking your potential. You are not simply an ordinary human, John Miller. There is something within you, something that you've never realized, and I am here to help you awaken it." John felt a tremor of doubt in his chest. "What kind of potential? I'm not some kind of super soldier. I'm just—" "Exactly," Lyrics interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. "You are just a human. And it is precisely because of that, because of the human spirit, that you hold the key to defeating the Jalak. They are powerful, yes, but they are rigid. Their technology is unmatched, their weapons deadly. But they lack the one thing that makes you dangerous." John hesitated. "And what's that?" "Adaptability," Lyrics said, her voice low but filled with authority. "The Jalak have no capacity for change. They are slaves to their own structure. But humans, you learn, you grow, you fight. You are not bound by the same laws they are." John nodded, though his mind was still struggling to fully understand. He had never considered himself special, just a regular guy. But now, being thrust into the middle of an intergalactic war, he was starting to realize that his ordinary life had been a thin veneer over something much greater. He could feel his heart beating faster, his pulse quickening with the thought of what was at stake. Lyrics led him to a console at the center of the room. A screen flickered to life, displaying a map of Earth, zooming in on specific locations, cities, military bases, and hidden areas marked with strange symbols. "This is where we'll begin," she said, pointing to a location near the heart of Europe. "The Jalak are using a hidden base there, far beneath the surface. We need to find it, infiltrate it, and retrieve an artifact before they do." John felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had never been in combat, had never seen action of any kind. How was he supposed to help in a war against beings from another galaxy? But there was something in Lyrics' eyes that made him believe she knew what she was talking about. He had to trust her, there was no other choice. "Let's go," John said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyrics looked at him, assessing, before nodding. "Very well. But first, we must start your training." John's heart skipped a beat. "Training? What kind of training?" Lyrics' eyes shimmered with determination. "You will learn to harness your latent abilities, to tap into the potential that lies dormant within you. You have the ability to access the essence, the force that connects all life in the universe. It is not something you can see or touch, but it is everywhere. And you have the power to manipulate it, to make it work for you." The words hung in the air, almost too incredible to believe. John had heard of mystical concepts like the Force in movies, but he had always dismissed them as fantasy. But the way Lyrics spoke about it, the conviction in her voice, made him wonder if there was some truth to it. "How do I start?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. Lyrics stepped closer, her presence suddenly overwhelming. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder, and for a brief moment, He could feel a surge of energy coursing through his body, electric, warm, and oddly comforting. It was as though her touch had unlocked something deep within him. "Close your eyes, John," she instructed softly. "Breathe in deeply. Focus." John did as she said, closing his eyes and trying to steady his breath. His mind raced, thoughts jumbled with confusion and anxiety. How could he possibly tap into some kind of cosmic force? He wasn't a Jedi. He was just an ordinary guy. But he had to try. The stakes were too high. As he focused, trying to quiet his mind, a strange sensation began to rise within him. It was subtle at first, a faint pull, like a magnetic force within his chest. It was as if something was drawing him deeper, something beyond his understanding. He reached out mentally, feeling the energy around him. The ship, the air, even the very atoms of his body seemed to hum with life. He was connected to everything. Everything was connected to him. Suddenly, a jolt of energy coursed through his arm, and he gasped, his eyes snapping open. He looked at Lyrics, who was watching him intently. "You felt it," she said, her voice a mixture of approval and something more. "You've just tapped into the essence, John. That was your first step." John's breath came faster, his heart racing with excitement and disbelief. He had no idea what had just happened, but there was no denying that something had shifted inside him. "That was amazing," he said, still in awe. "What do I do now?" Lyrics smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her seem more human. "Now you learn control. Focus. You must learn to channel the essence, to use it to protect yourself and defeat the Jalak. You are ready for the first test." John raised an eyebrow. "Test?" Lyrics' smile deepened, but there was something dangerous in her eyes now. "You will face your first challenge shortly. A Jalak agent is already on Earth, and we must eliminate him before he can report back to his superiors. This will be your trial, John. Your first real test in the war." John felt a surge of adrenaline. He had no idea what he was capable of, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let the Earth fall to these invaders. Not without a fight. Lyric stepped back, her expression serious once again. "Prepare yourself, John. The war is upon you." And with that, the true weight of what he was about to do hit him. There was no turning back now. The air on the ship was still, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. John stood before Lyrics, his pulse quickening as she outlined the mission ahead. His mind was racing with a mix of uncertainty and resolve. He had just barely begun to understand what was happening, and now he was expected to confront a Jalak agent, a being of unimaginable power, in a fight that could decide the fate of Earth. Lyrics' voice cut through his thoughts. "We have located the agent. He is in the heart of your world, a city you know well. His objective is to retrieve intelligence and report back to the Jalak. If he succeeds, the Jalak will be able to strengthen their foothold on Earth." John clenched his fists, his thoughts still whirling. He had never been a fighter, never imagined himself in a situation like this. But the responsibility felt like a weight in his chest, and as he looked at Lyrics, he knew there was no turning back. The fate of his world rested on him now. "How do we find him?" John asked, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at him. Lyrics glanced at the holographic map that hovered in the air before them. "He is close, closer than you think. The Jalak agent is in the city, hidden beneath the surface. His goal is to reach a communication node, where he can send his report. But he will not be able to escape once we find him." John nodded, his mind racing through the possibilities. He had no combat experience, no formal training. How could he possibly stand a chance against an alien agent who was far more powerful than he could ever imagine? Yet, the thought of his home, his city, his friends and family, he couldn't let the Jalak take it from him. Not without a fight. "You're ready," Lyric said, as if reading his mind. "You have tapped into the essence. Now, You must learn to use it to your advantage. John felt a surge of determination. He might not be ready, but he would never back down. He couldn't let fear stop him. Before he could speak, Lyrics extended her arm, and a bright light enveloped them. The ship seemed to vanish, replaced by the sharp, familiar skyline of the city. John squinted against the bright sunlight as he looked around. They were standing on a rooftop, high above the bustling streets below. The wind ruffled his hair, and for a moment, it felt surreal, like he was in some kind of dream. "We're close now," Lyrics said, her tone low, dangerous. She was no longer the calm, composed woman she had been on the ship. Now, there was something in her eyes, a fire, a raw energy that seemed to surge through her with every movement. John's eyes followed her as she moved to the edge of the rooftop, scanning the surroundings with her sharp, alien gaze. "The agent is nearby. He's cloaked, hidden from your human senses, but I can track him through the essence." John didn't fully understand what the essence was or how Lyrics was able to use it, but he trusted her. She had already proven that she knew more than he could even imagine. He watched her closely, trying to follow her lead. Suddenly, she turned to him. "Stay close. Do not engage until I say so. The Jalak are dangerous, and they will not hesitate to kill." John nodded, his stomach twisting with nervousness, but there was no time for fear. Lyrics was already moving, her steps light and quick, as though the air around her bent to her will. John followed closely behind, trying to keep up, his mind focused. As they descended the building's fire escape, John's thoughts raced. The streets of the city were just as busy as always, people walking to and fro, cars honking in the distance, the sound of everyday life. But beneath the surface, something was terribly wrong. There was an agent among them, an enemy who had the power to bring destruction. They stopped in an alley, where Lyrics raised a hand, signaling for silence. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her expression fierce. "He is close. We need to move now." John's heart thudded in his chest as they slipped through the streets, moving quickly but without drawing attention. They entered a nondescript building, an old warehouse of some kind, its peeling paint and rusting metal doors masking the horrors hidden inside. Lyric stopped once they were inside, her eyes scanning the space. The building was empty, save for crates and forgotten machinery. John's eyes darted around, trying to make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, a faint, unnatural sound filled the air, a low hum that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "There," Lyrics whispered, pointing toward the far end of the warehouse. John squinted, but saw nothing. "He's cloaked," Lyrics explained. "But not for long." John's pulse quickened as Lyrics raised her hand, her eyes glowing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. The air around them seemed to crackle with energy. John's body tensed as he watched her. She was drawing from the essence again, focusing all her attention on the invisible agent. The hum grew louder, and suddenly, a figure emerged from thin air, a tall, dark-skinned humanoid figure with sharp, angular features. His eyes glowed with an eerie yellow light and his body was covered in a dark, slick armor that seemed to shimmer and shift. The Jalak agent was terrifying, his presence almost suffocating. John instinctively stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. The agent seemed to notice him, his glowing eyes narrowing with malice. Without a word, the Jalak raised his hand, and the air seemed to bend around him. A blast of energy shot toward them, tearing through the air with the force of a small explosion. John barely had time to react. He was thrown back by the force of the blast, crashing into the crates behind him. Pain shot through his body, but he fought to stay conscious. His vision blurred, and for a moment, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. Lyrics was already on the move. She dodged the energy blast with ease, her movements fluid and graceful as she closed the distance between herself and the agent. She raised her hand, and with a flick of her wrist, a surge of energy shot toward the Jalak, forcing him back. The agent snarled, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. "You cannot defeat me, alien," he hissed, his voice filled with a deep, guttural tone. "I am the Jalak. You are nothing." John struggled to get back to his feet, his body aching from the impact. His heart pounded in his chest, but something was different now. He could feel it, the essence. It was like a power inside of him, just waiting to be tapped. He focused, closing his eyes for a moment, and then he reached for it. To his surprise, it was there. The same magnetic pull he had felt before. But now, it was stronger, more focused. He could feel it surging through his veins, like a flood of electricity coursing through his body. He opened his eyes. The world seemed clearer now, sharper. He could sense the agent's every move, the pulse of energy that surrounded him. With a deep breath, John thrust his hand forward, just as Lyrics launched another attack. A shockwave of energy burst from his palm, slamming into the Jalak agent with a force that made the air crackle. The agent staggered back, surprised by the strength of the attack. John didn't wait for him to recover. He pressed forward, feeling the essence flow through him. This was his moment. This was the fight that could change everything. The Jalak agent hissed in anger, but John was ready. The battle had begun. John's heart was hammering in his chest as the energy crackled in the air. He had never felt anything like this before, this power, surging through him, filling every fiber of his being. The Jalak agent, disoriented for a moment by the blast, was now glaring at him, his yellow eyes burning with fury. The agent's mouth twisted into a snarl, and John could almost hear the alien's thoughts, sharp and full of malice. "You will regret that," the agent growled, his voice low and rumbling. "You cannot win. You are nothing." John clenched his fists, his fingers tingling with an energy he couldn't fully control yet. The battle had only just begun, but already, he could feel the stakes. This was no longer just about surviving, it was about protecting everything he knew. Earth. His friends, his family, his home. Lyrics had already moved into action, her movements fluid and graceful, as if the fight was as natural to her as breathing. She dodged another blast from the agent with ease, twisting her body in a way that seemed impossible, her energy bending around her like an extension of herself. John watched her in awe, the way she manipulated the essence, her power emanating in waves that shook the very air. He wanted to be like that. He had to be. But the agent wasn't going to let them have an easy victory. With a growl of frustration, he raised his hand, and the very ground beneath them seemed to shift. A pulse of dark energy radiated outward, and John felt a wave of pressure press against him, forcing him to stagger back. His breath caught in his throat as he felt the raw power of the Jalak. "You are weak, human," the agent spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You don't understand the power you're up against. The Jalak are the masters of this galaxy." John felt the weight of those words sink in. He didn't understand everything about this war, about the Jalak or their power. But what he did know was that he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when Earth was at risk. Lyrics' voice cut through the air, calm and commanding. "John, focus. Channel the essence. Do not let him overwhelm you." John nodded, his mind racing as he tried to draw on the power Lyrics had helped him tap into. The Jalak agent was fast, too fast, and every time John tried to advance, the agent countered with a burst of energy that sent him reeling. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The essence was within him, but it was still foreign, still raw. He could feel it moving through him, like a wild, untamed force, but he wasn't sure how to control it. His body hummed with energy, and each time he tried to push it outward, it flickered and sputtered. "Breathe, John," Lyrics called out, her voice carrying over the chaos of the battle. "You must let go of your doubts. The essence is a part of you. Let it guide you." John closed his eyes for a moment, pushing everything else aside, the fear, the pressure, the doubts. He had to trust in this power, trust that he wasn't alone in this fight. He could feel the essence swirling around him, the vast energy of the universe ready to be wielded, but he had to find the right rhythm. He exhaled slowly, centering himself. He focused on the pull of energy inside him, on the way it connected him to the world around him. And suddenly, it clicked. A rush of power surged through him, and when he opened his eyes, the world seemed sharper, more defined. His senses were heightened, and the essence hummed through him like electricity. With a shout, he extended his hand toward the Jalak agent, and this time, when the energy surged, it didn't fizzle out. It blasted forward with focused intent, a concentrated beam of raw power that struck the agent square in the chest. The force of the blast sent the Jalak reeling, his body slamming against the wall of the warehouse with a deafening crash. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the agent stirred, his eyes flashing with unbridled rage. "You dare challenge me?" he hissed, his voice full of venom. He staggered to his feet, his armor rippling with dark energy as he prepared to strike back. But John was no longer afraid. He could feel the essence coursing through him now, guiding his movements, sharpening his focus. Every thought, every action, felt deliberate. The fight wasn't just about brute strength anymore, it was about control. It was about adapting to the situation, bending the power to his will. John lunged forward, his hands crackling with energy. He wasn't sure how he was doing it, but it didn't matter. He was no longer just reacting. He was controlling the flow of energy, manipulating it like a weapon. His fist shot out, releasing a burst of raw power that struck the Jalak agent in the shoulder, knocking him off balance. Lyrics was at his side in an instant, her eyes glowing with approval. "Well done, John. But don't let your guard down." John barely had time to process her words before the Jalak agent regained his footing. With a guttural roar, the agent raised his hand, summoning a wave of destructive energy that erupted from his palm. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the building, and John barely had time to react. "John!" Lyrics shouted, but the blast hit him square in the chest, sending him flying backward. Pain erupted through his body, and he collided with a stack of crates, the force knocking the wind out of him. For a moment, everything went black. His vision swam as he tried to focus, his body aching with the aftermath of the attack. His chest felt like it was on fire, and his head was spinning. But he couldn't afford to stay down. Not now. He took a shallow breath, pushing through the pain. He could hear the Jalak agent laughing, cold, mocking laughter that made his blood run cold. The agent had the upper hand, but John wasn't done yet. He couldn't be. With a grunt, he pushed himself to his feet, shaking off the haze of pain. The essence was still there, still inside him, waiting to be used. He reached for it once more, pulling it from the depths of his being. This time, it was easier, familiar. He could feel the power rushing through him, flooding his limbs with strength. The Jalak agent was advancing on Lyrics, his eyes full of contempt. John couldn't let him hurt her. He couldn't let him win. With a roar, John thrust his hand forward, unleashing a concentrated blast of energy that struck the Jalak agent dead in the chest. The force of the impact sent the agent flying across the room, slamming into the far wall. For a moment, the warehouse was silent. John's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, sweat dripping down his face. The Jalak agent was still. Too still. He stepped forward cautiously, eyes narrowed, his body still crackling with energy. "Lyrics," he said, his voice hoarse. Is he done?" Lyrics moved to his side, her expression unreadable as she stepped closer to the fallen agent. She knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his body. After a long pause, she looked up at John, a rare expression of approval on her face. "For now, he is. But this is only the beginning." John looked down at the agent's unconscious form, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had done it. He had fought back. But as Lyrics had said, this was only the beginning. The warehouse was silent, save for the soft hum of energy resonating in the air. The Jalak agent lay crumpled against the wall, his body unmoving but for the faint shimmer of his armor. John stood over him, panting heavily, his chest still heaving from the battle. His body was sore, bruised, but alive. Lyrics remained at his side, her sharp eyes watching the fallen agent with a calculating expression. The air around them felt thick, tense, as though the aftermath of the battle had left a weight that was not so easily lifted. John wiped the sweat from his brow and took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He had done it. He had fought, and for the first time, he had felt like he could actually make a difference. But it wasn't over. It wasn't over at all. What now? John asked, his voice hoarse but filled with a new resolve. Lyrics didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the fallen agent, her eyes flicking over his body as she scanned it for any signs of life. Her hand hovered over his chest for a moment, her fingers glowing faintly as though she was probing for something beyond the physical. The silence stretched out for a moment longer, and John's thoughts began to wander. He had always considered himself an average person, someone who didn't get involved in anything beyond his own little world. But now he was part of something much larger. A war, not just for Earth's survival, but for the future of countless other worlds. And it terrified him. Lyrics finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. He's alive. Barely. But he'll be back on his feet in a matter of hours, ready to fight again. The Jalak are relentless. She turned her eyes to John, her gaze intense. And so must you be. John swallowed hard, looking down at the agent's unconscious form. He had just taken down one of them, but Lyrics's words hit home, this wasn't a simple victory. This battle was far from won. Lyrics continued, her voice hardening with determination. The agent was just the beginning. You're not just fighting for your survival, John. This is the first step in a much larger plan to stop the Jalak invasion. John's stomach tightened. What do you mean, larger plan? Lyrics's gaze turned toward the door of the warehouse, her eyes scanning the empty street beyond. We need to strike at the heart of the Jalak's influence. This agent was carrying intelligence, information about the locations of their main bases on Earth and the true scale of their operation. I can already feel the pull of the essence leading me to it. John didn't understand all of what she was saying, but he knew enough to realize that the stakes had just gotten much higher. The war wasn't just about battling one alien agent, it was about stopping an entire galactic invasion. Earth was just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle. Where do we go from here? John asked, his voice filled with urgency. Lyrics paused, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the data she had gathered from the agent's unconscious form. The air hummed with energy as she worked, and John could feel the pressure building. The Jalak were far more organized than he had expected. They were already planning for the next phase of their invasion, and they wouldn't be easy to stop. The first thing we need is more information, Lyrics replied, her voice sharp. The Jalak have infiltrated Earth at all levels, governments, military, industries. They've been laying the groundwork for decades, waiting for the right time to launch a full-scale invasion. She turned toward John, her expression dark. We can't let them proceed. We need to uncover their plans and disrupt them before they can fully mobilize. John nodded, his mind still spinning from the revelation. The magnitude of what they were facing was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He had thought the Jalak agent was bad enough, but now it seemed like Earth was teetering on the brink of something far worse. We have to act fast, he said, his voice gaining strength. But how do we stop them? What's the next step? Lyrics looked at him, her eyes piercing, as though she was evaluating his readiness. The next step is to find their key installations, the ones they've established here on Earth. They've hidden them well, but we have the advantage of knowing their methods. You'll have to be prepared for anything, these infiltrators won't go down easily, and the closer we get to their true objectives, the more dangerous they will become. John didn't flinch. He knew there was no turning back now. He had already taken the first step into this war, and he wasn't going to back down. The Zolok might have had the advantage of technology, but he had something they didn't: his adaptability, his will to fight, and, thanks to lyrics, the essence. "Let's move," John said, his voice steady. "I'm ready." Lyrics nodded approvingly. "Good. We leave immediately. The longer we wait, the more ground the Zolok gain." She turned and began walking toward the door, her movements calm but purposeful. John followed closely behind, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The battle, the sudden knowledge of the Zolok's presence on Earth, and the immense responsibility that had been thrust upon him, it was a lot to process. But he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about protecting Earth, about stopping a threat that no one even knew existed. They moved quickly through the streets, the hustle and bustle of the city now completely unaware of the war being waged beneath the surface. John couldn't shake the feeling that the world he knew was about to change forever. There was no going back. As they neared a secluded part of the city, Lyric stopped suddenly, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "We're close. The Zolok's base of operations is nearby." John looked around, his senses heightened. He didn't know what to expect, but the tension in the air was palpable. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Lyrics raised her hand, signaling for silence. "They'll be monitoring this area. Stay close, and be ready." John's pulse quickened as he positioned himself behind Lyrics. He had no idea what kind of opposition they would face next, but he knew one thing: it was only going to get harder from here. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The silence in the alley was oppressive. The city felt like a different place now, the hum of everyday life drowned out by the weight of the mission that hung over John like a storm cloud. Lyrics moved in front of him, her eyes sharp and alert, her presence almost otherworldly. John followed her, staying as close as he could, his senses heightened by the tension in the air. He had faced an alien agent before, but this felt different. They were about to infiltrate the very heart of the Zolok's operation on Earth. As they neared their destination, the air grew thick with an unnatural stillness. The buildings around them seemed to close in, their shadows long and ominous. Every corner, every alley, seemed to conceal something more dangerous than what met the eye. "This is it," Lyric said, her voice barely a whisper. "We are on the edge of their stronghold. The Zolok have been running their operations here for years. This is where they gather intelligence, build their forces, and coordinate their movements." John could feel his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of excitement and fear swirling within him. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, he had to face it. He glanced over at Lyrics, her focused gaze giving him a sense of calm. She had been guiding him through this entire process, teaching him how to harness the essence. But this was different. This was real combat. This wasn't just about learning, this was about survival. They reached a nondescript building, its exterior unremarkable in the midst of the city's hustle and bustle. But John knew better than to underestimate its appearance. The Zolok had a knack for hiding their operations in plain sight, cloaking their true intentions beneath the veil of normalcy. Lyric stood still for a moment, her eyes scanning the building. "Whatever happens, stay close," she said, her voice steady. "Do not stray from my side. This will be their most heavily guarded location." John nodded. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. He had learned a lot since his first encounter with Lyrics, how to use the essence, how to tap into his own power. But he was still no warrior. The Zolok had centuries of experience. And he had only just begun to understand the depths of the fight he was part of. With a quiet motion, Lyric stepped toward the door, her fingers trailing along the surface. A soft hum filled the air, and the door slid open with a barely audible sound. They entered the building, the faint scent of metal and something sterile filling their lungs. The interior was cold, too clean, and the lighting was dim, casting long shadows across the walls. John could feel the oppressive weight of the place, as though the very building itself was alive with the presence of something dark and powerful. He followed Lyrics closely, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that they were being watched. They moved through a series of narrow hallways, each step more cautious than the last. The tension was suffocating, and John's every instinct screamed that danger was close. He could feel the essence stirring within him, ready to be called upon. He took a deep breath and focused, trying to calm his nerves. "There are security measures everywhere," Lyrics whispered, her voice barely audible. "The Jalak are thorough. They'll be aware of our presence soon. We must be quick." John nodded, trying to steady his breath. He had faced one Jalak agent, but this was different. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was the heart of their operation. Lyrics led him through the corridors, her movements so fluid that it seemed like the building was parting around her. She stopped suddenly, her hand raised in warning. "They're here," she said, her voice sharp. John's heart skipped a beat as the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. They weren't alone anymore. The Jalak were on to them. Lyrics moved quickly, ducking into a small room off the hallway. John followed her, his pulse racing. The walls of the room were lined with strange, alien technology, monitors, blinking lights, and equipment he couldn't begin to understand. At the center of the room was a large console, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. "There it is," Lyrics said, her eyes fixed on the console. "This is where they're controlling their operations." John glanced at her, confusion evident on his face. "What is it?" "This is their command center," Lyrics replied. "The heart of the Jalak presence on Earth. If we can shut this down, we can cripple their ability to coordinate their forces." John's eyes widened. "Shut it down? How do we do that?" Lyrics stepped toward the console, her fingers moving quickly over the surface. "I will need a moment. This is a delicate operation, and we cannot afford to make a mistake." John nodded, his eyes darting toward the door. He could feel the pressure mounting. The Jalak would be here soon, and they weren't going to let anyone interfere with their plans. He closed his eyes, focusing on the essence. Lyrics had taught him how to draw from it, to use it for strength and focus. But this was different. This wasn't just about power, it was about precision. He took a deep breath, reaching for the energy within him. His body hummed with the force of the essence, and for a brief moment, he felt as though he could bend the very fabric of reality itself. His fingers tingled, and he could almost feel the pulse of the console in the room, a lifeline connecting the Jalak's forces to the world outside. He opened his eyes, his focus sharp. Lyrics was still working at the console, her fingers moving with practiced ease. John could feel the Jalak closing in, their presence growing stronger by the second. Suddenly, a blaring alarm pierced the silence, and the lights in the room flickered. "They found us," Lyrics said, her voice laced with urgency. "We need to move. Now." John's heart raced as the console emitted a high-pitched screech, and the walls seemed to vibrate with the force of the Jalak's counterattack. He could hear the footsteps growing louder, growing closer. Lyrics glanced over at him, her eyes locking onto his. "Are you ready?" John nodded, the essence thrumming within him. "I'm ready." With a sharp motion, Lyrics tore a panel from the wall, revealing a hidden access point. She moved quickly, her movements swift and calculated. "This way," she urged. John followed, his eyes scanning the corridor as they moved quickly through the building. The Jalak were closing in, and the pressure was mounting with every step. They had to reach the central hub before it was too late. But as they rounded the corner, a wave of energy slammed into John's chest, sending him flying backward. He crashed into the wall with a grunt, the air knocked from his lungs. His vision blurred for a moment, and he fought to stay conscious. The force of the blow had taken him by surprise. Lyrics was already on her feet, her eyes burning with intensity. She raised her hand, and a wave of energy erupted from her palm, slamming into the Jalak agent who had ambushed them. The agent staggered back, his body shimmering with a dark aura. "You'll never stop us," the agent hissed, his voice full of venom. "We are the Jalak. You are nothing." Lyrics's gaze narrowed, and with a swift motion, she lunged at the agent. The battle was about to escalate, and John was about to learn that the true fight had only just begun. The war for Earth's future had reached its most critical point. The Jalak agent staggered, his shimmering armor pulsing with dark energy as he recovered from Lyrics's blast. John could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what was happening pressing down on him. He was standing at the precipice now, the fate of Earth and every living thing on it hanging in the balance. Lyrics, standing tall and unwavering, was already moving toward the agent, her hands glowing with the power of the essence. But John could feel his own energy surge, his body humming with the force that had become his new strength. It was clear now, there was no more time for doubt. No more time for hesitation. He had to step up. The Jalak agent roared, a guttural sound that echoed off the walls of the hallway, and lunged forward, the ground shaking beneath his feet as he closed the distance. His hands crackled with energy, and he aimed a blast of pure destructive force at Lyrics. She was fast, faster than anything John had ever seen, but the blast was too powerful to dodge. It collided with her, sending her sprawling back against the wall, her body crumpling to the floor in a heap. John's blood ran cold. "Lyrics," he shouted, rushing toward her. But Lyrics was already pushing herself up, her breathing ragged, but her eyes still burning with defiance. "I'm fine," she said, her voice low but fierce. "We cannot stop now, John. You have to finish this." John's heart raced. This wasn't just about them anymore, it was about everything. The Jalak had already laid waste to entire civilizations, and Earth was next. He had no choice. With a deep breath, he focused, the essence flowing through him like wildfire. The energy swirled inside his chest, his hands buzzing with power. The world around him seemed to pulse, every sound, every motion vibrating with the force of the battle. But the most important thing was this: he was no longer just reacting. He was controlling it. The Jalak agent turned toward him, his yellow eyes burning with hate. "You think you can defeat me, human?" he spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing. The Jalak are eternal." John stepped forward, every inch of his body alive with the essence. "I'm not here to prove anything," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "I'm here to save my world." The Jalak agent sneered and extended his hand, launching another blast of energy straight at John. It moved faster than anything he had ever seen, but John didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hands, and as if by instinct, he focused every ounce of the essence into a barrier of pure energy. The blast collided with the barrier, and for a moment, John felt the raw force of the Jalak's power. The energy rattled through his bones, the pressure threatening to overwhelm him. But he held on, pushing back, his mind focusing on the flow of energy, drawing from the essence like a tidal wave. With a sudden cry, John pushed the barrier forward, redirecting the energy of the Jalak's blast and sending it back toward the agent. The force of the impact sent the agent stumbling back, his body skidding across the floor as if the very weight of John's power had crushed him. The Jalak agent grunted, clearly disoriented, but before he could recover, John was already moving. He pressed the attack. Every step was filled with a purpose he hadn't known he had, the essence guiding him as his body surged with strength. He reached out, his hands crackling with energy, and with a focused motion, he slammed a concentrated blast of power into the agent's chest. The Jalak agent let out a shriek of agony, his body convulsing as the energy coursed through him, igniting his armor with an unnatural glow. The agent fell to his knees, smoke rising from the cracks in his armor. John stood over him, breathing heavily, his energy still crackling, but now he could feel it beginning to wane. The essence had given him more power than he ever thought possible, but it was still a force he wasn't fully in control of. The Jalak agent's yellow eyes flickered with something akin to recognition. You've tapped into the essence, he rasped, his voice strained. No human should have such power. John's gaze hardened, his breath steadying. Maybe you're right. But it's enough. He raised his hands one final time, and with a cry, unleashed all the energy he could muster. The blast surged from his fingertips, enveloping the agent in a brilliant flash of light. When the light cleared, the Jalak agent was no longer moving. His armor lay shattered on the floor, his body still. John stood over him, panting, his heart racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. It felt like a dream. But the quiet that followed, the lack of enemy forces, told him everything he needed to know. It was over. Lyrics approached him slowly, her expression unreadable. She had watched the entire battle, her gaze never wavering from the two of them. You've done it, she said softly. John shook his head, his thoughts still whirling. I didn't do it alone. He turned to her, a sense of gratitude bubbling up inside him. You taught me how to use the essence. You showed me how to fight. Lyrics gave him a small smile. You had it in you all along. You just needed to believe in it. John looked down at the fallen Jalak agent. The building around them was still, almost eerie in its silence. So it's over. They won't be able to do anything now. Lyrics knelt beside the agent's remains, her eyes scanning the broken armor. This battle is over, yes. But the war has only just begun. The Jalak will send more forces, and they will retaliate. Earth is still vulnerable. She stood up and turned to face John, her expression firm. But we've taken the first step. We've crippled their ability to coordinate, and now we have the advantage. John felt a knot of tension loosen in his chest. There was still much work to be done, but they had won this battle. And in that moment, he realized something. It wasn't just about the power of the essence. It wasn't about being the strongest fighter, the most skilled warrior. It was about the will to stand up, to keep fighting even when it seemed impossible. Lyrics' words echoed in his mind, you are part of something much bigger than yourself now. This is your world to protect. As they walked out of the building, the sun was beginning to rise over the horizon. The city, still unaware of the war that had been fought just beneath its surface, stirred to life. John's journey was far from over, but in that moment, he knew one thing for certain, Earth had a chance. And he would fight to protect it with everything he had. The war had only just begun. But with Lyrics by his side and the power of the essence coursing through him, John was ready for whatever came next. The fate of the world rested in his hands. And he was ready to face it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.